of the Eastern Rec and Sports Centre. Councillor Johansson, does somebody want to second the Pauline Cotter? I understand David East has got an amendment that he'd like to put on the table. Yep, so if we could look at the proposed amendment. And I need a seconder for it, so Councillor Livingston. David?
Essentially, Madam Mayor, I'm just going back to the staff recommendations with a couple of additions and a slight amendments. I'm very keen to see this process move forward. It's been on the table a long time, and we seem to be coming up with resolutions just add more time and unnecessary delay to this process. The recommendation that amendment that I'm putting forward here merely adds the word review to the first clause, which I'd like to just ensure that the criteria for assessing the locations is all in order. And in the second part, I've just put noting that the selection process in terms of reference for the working group will need further clarification and approval. The way they were worded in the original report, there was some uncertainty as to who would be on this committee, how it would be selected, what sort of skill set, etc., etc. So I'd just like some clarity around that, and I don't think that's a particularly onerous task. And third, the fourth and fifth ones, consider options for an anchor legacy project for New Brighton, including but not limited to hot saltwater pools, program pools, aquatic playground features, which is consistent with the Mayor's comments in recent weeks of wanting to see an anchor project for New Brighton. And thirdly, the last section of the amendment just gives the option and ability for aquatics facilities to be assessed against any activities that are happening with suitable partners in the area, and not ruling out the ability for a JV with a suitable partner to create sporting facilities in either part of the ward, Limwood or the northeast. So I'm happy to speak to the motion again in a moment. Just
can I have a couple of queries around this? I know that I don't think that people are expecting such a long period of time for a determination for the process.
That was the wording that the staff had put in their original motion.
I think that the community would be impatient in this regard. I think that to say that the process wouldn't be determined until the 30th of September would be way too long. I think people have misread that might have been the way it was framed, but I don't think that's what the intention...
Well, I read it, Madam Mayor, as that the process begins and that a report is back to council by the 30th of
with
September.
The recommended site.
With the recommended site.
That was the intention. That was the understanding.
But Mr. Phil Sells nodding. So that was the intention, that the process begins tomorrow. And the site is determined by the 30th of September.
Okay. So, but won't it come back to council before then to make a decision?
I would imagine that would be the case.
Right. And just the other one is that you've got and/or the northeast at the bottom.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was allowing for the ability to co-locate a facility in either ward and/or. I'm happy for it to be amended, that part of it. I know when you and I talked, we didn't have the last bit on it, but I thought at the time when we proposed this motion last week that wording was actually going to be in keeping with an earlier part. I think I don't have the exact words that you and I had drafted, and it just tied the two together, but I'm happy to
Yeah,
try.
I think that what I was trying to do was to try and find a way of remedying a problem that existed in the previous recommendation, which included a vote against having a sport and rec facility in the sort of Linwood-Sumner corridor. So there was a motion. Correct me if I'm wrong, John, but I think that there was a motion that money be set aside in the budget for another facility in the Hagley Ferrymead and the Linwood-Woolston area to meet a pre-existing need. Is that right? And that was voted down.
Essentially, yes. Council supported a recreation sport facility in the northeast or suitable location.
Yeah.
Previous to that, in the long-term plan, at the end of the plan, can't remember what year, there was a sum of money set aside for a aquatic centre or similar in the Linwood-Woolston area, should that be deemed necessary by council at the time.
Right.
So that was pre-existing.
Right. So, but that's got lost in the mix, hasn't it? So I thought that what...
It's no longer in.
Yeah. So what we were trying to do was we're going through a planning process now, and I know that we're going through a long-term planning process, but it was kind of to signal that that there will be a need. I mean, there is going to be an opportunity in that Linwood-Woolston area because of the new school builds in those areas that will enable the potential for a partnership arrangement to be developed. And what we wanted to do was to signal to staff that to start to have those conversations, it won't be needed in this year's annual budget. But if we don't start thinking about it now and giving you the authority to go and talk about it with the Ministry of Education, then we'll lose the time, we'll lose the opportunity that might arise in the course of our next the next 2 years. I'm thinking 2017, they'll be looking at some of these options. So that the intention of that last one was to really look at that Linwood-Sumner corridor in terms of meeting a need that was missing. Yeah. So, but to make it very clear that the proposal, and because you've come up with a series of sites which are all in accordance with the resolution of the previous council, but the problem has been is that you've gone off into the Linwood, the Aranui end of town, when in fact the need is in the northeast, because that's where the growth in the population is. But for New Brighton not to be in competition for that, I mean, the sense that I got was that New Brighton was focusing on the Eastern Sport Rec Centre because that was the only game in town. And so what we want to signal here is that the council itself go away and look at options for an anchor legacy project for New Brighton. And, it doesn't matter what the content of that is, but to work with the local community, working up options and looking at funding mechanisms so that we're not committing to the funding, but we're saying that if we go down this path, then it will be separate from the Eastern Sport and Rec Centre, so that the Eastern Sport and Rec Centre can go ahead, that the site can start to be looked for and finalised. We need geotechnical reports on the QE2 site, for example, all of those issues that were raised this morning. We need to work out what the options are, in terms of a legacy for New Brighton, which is really servicing the east. And we need to give some reassurance that staff are engaging now with the Ministry of Education for the development of a pool, a smaller pool option it will be, obviously, but in association with an entire school rebuild. And that was the signal that we wanted to give, rather than sign off on 7 sites to go through a process that will just destroy that community. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In order to allow Council's Recreation Sports Unit to give effect to that summary, it would be helpful to have a mandate for this from this council to proceed with a site selection process for a recreation sports centre in North East Christchurch.
Yep.
And get on with that quick, smart.
Yep.
It would be essential to have a mandate from this council to investigate options for a legacy project in New Brighton. It would be useful for my unit to have a mandate from this council to investigate opportunities and options for an aquatic facility in the Linwood-Woolston area, possibly as a result of collaboration with the Ministry of Education. Those last two would not in any way commit council. They would just give us a mandate to go out and examine and look. Really, the only commitment would be council's pre-existing commitment to a recreation sports centre, and ideally in the northeast, where at this stage at least is the area of most proven need.
So that's certainly my intention with it. Yanni?
We could spend a lot of time today trying to come up with resolutions and processes and criteria. I just want to put the facts on the table. We heard from a number of deputations from the Burwood-Pegasus ward, and they all said something different. They all had different ideas about what we wanted to do. What they wanted to do, or what they wanted us to do, the thing they had in common was they were not happy with the selection process that had been identified by staff. So moving an amendment to go back to a process that people had concerns with, I don't think is the right way to go ahead. Actually, the reason the committee wanted a workshop was that we need to work through these issues. I appreciate we have a new council, and it's really important that we can come together, discuss things in a more informal setting than the formal council meeting, to work out what is the best, and I actually think the most efficient and effective process to select the sites based on what we want to do as a council. And that's why the committee said there's really three clear things that are happening, and unfortunately they'd all been put into one, and that's what was leading to the confusion. The second point is that the criteria that are mentioned in the report are said as part of a aquatic facilities review under 3.3. The aquatic facilities review has never been approved by the governance group of this council. Staff have done some work, they haven't finished that review, they're unable to bring it to the committee till next month, and that is something that we need to sign off on at a governance level. We have aquatic facilities throughout the city that we need to consider, and so I think it's incredibly important that, and part of the reason for wanting the workshop was that so staff can give you some of the context to the other aquatic facilities issues that are happening around the city. I've tried to get that review brought in front of the elected members, and I think we're getting to a point where it's nearly ready from staff. So I think adopting a set of criteria that we haven't signed off at a governance group with a strategy that the staff have reviewed but that we haven't as elected members doesn't seem to me a very sensible way to go about it. So
you're saying these aren't the criteria?
These are criteria that, if you read what's put in here, have been updated as a review of the aquatic facilities plan in June 2012 and February 2014.
No, they say Council's criteria for the location and scope of aquatic facilities informed the development of Council's aquatic facility network since 2006.
Yeah. So these might be the existing criteria from 2006. Staff would have to answer whether they've been changed in terms of 2014 review or 2012 review. The point I'm making is that we haven't actually, at a governance level, signed off on the strategic direction we want to go for aquatic facilities going forward. I don't want to hold up the location decision on the replacement for a QE2 for a medium-sized facility any longer than we need to. I think we need to get that process underway but having a workshop, I think, is the most sensible thing so that we can all get that agreement. And again, approving a process that people were unanimous in expressing concern of having, half of the community board from Hagley Ferrymead onto a committee with half the board from Burwood-Pegasus, when you're talking about a site that is actually in Burwood-Pegasus, and the people that are concerned seem to be that the different groups in Burwood-Pegasus all have different ideas about what they want, doesn't seem a very good solution. So I really support the legacy stuff for New Brighton. Again, we seem to be lacking some details. let's spend some time having a workshop, refining what it is that we want to do and come up with some very clear recommendations. Unfortunately, I cannot support these amendments. I don't believe it takes us forward.
I don't know myself if the wording of the amendments captures exactly what John said, but I want what he said. Glenn.
Thank you. Yanni's he's not wrong, but I don't agree with him in this respect. And because I actually feel, in a sense, we've been workshopping this in full public view for all to see for at least a couple of weeks. Yes, and our role for each of us is to represent our communities.
Oh, sorry.
I've concluded we need to get started. We actually need to make a date, because people don't commit to things until a date is made. The community needs to see a spade go in the ground at some point. I think this is a very good way ahead. The Mayor, David, myself, we're at similar points with this, and I think it's very well done. It avoids those either-or arguments, both within the ward in terms of possible competing locations and between the wards as well. And I think there's a lot of goodwill and a determination to work together, not only for the good of this ward and also Hagley Ferrymead, but for the good of the city. I'm quite convinced that when the whole city sees this agreed on, that they'll be pleased for Burwood Pegasus and potentially also for Hagley Ferrymead. So I would urge that we support this.
Right. Look, we have an issue here in terms of timing. So the Environment Committee is due to run at 4 o'clock. So
Why don't they just delay?
yeah.
It's possibly easy.
I'd like to get this resolved today.
Yeah. All right. So you better delay the Environment Committee. Can we stop for 10 minutes and just have a quick cup of tea, and then we can work out how we might proceed from here? Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Delaying for 10